When it comes to kickstarting your enterprise AI strategy, leaders are often flooded with ideas and a deep sense of urgency. But without a clear framework, even well-resourced teams can end up spinning their wheels. Because the reality is only 1% of organizations consider themselves AI mature. The rest are just stuck in what today's guests call shadow AI, a mess of disconnected proof of concepts, siloed data, and untracked value. In this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast, we're talking with Kathleen Nowicke and Yoni Malchi, two well-versed AI consultants who've helped Fortune 100s escape that so-called POC purgatory, and they'll walk us through a deceptively simple 3-step process for doing AI right. Not flashy, but foundational. So you're building flywheels and not just going through fire drills. If you're tired of AI conversations that start with, "We need a chatbot," and end with, "What did that even accomplish?" well, stick around, because this episode may change the way you approach enterprise AI from the ground up. This is the AI Proving Ground podcast from Worldwide Technology. Everything AI, all in one place. Let's jump in. Kathleen, Yoni, thanks for joining us on today's episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Jenks, let's start with, I read a recent report from McKinsey that talks about how only 1% of organizations consider themselves AI mature. And I'm wondering, from the perspective of, developing, identifying, and prioritizing use cases, what is that 1% doing that the 99% are simply just getting wrong?
So I'll take this, Kathleen, just to get started. So I think what you hit on first is that there's some upfront work that has to get done to get started on the right foot. And I think that's going to be the majority of what we talk about today in this podcast, is what needs to be done upstream of actually building and deploying AI models and use cases. But there's a whole host of other things as well that we're not going to talk about today. Things like having the right platform in place, being able to reuse components from use case to use case, having your data set in a way that you can continuously build and grow your AI capabilities. Right. All these things are what set off what we call the flywheel effect, where we can pump out use cases, generate value in organizations. And that's really what I think the 1% of the organizations are doing well. It's a combination of getting started up front, correct, on the right foot, but then also setting themselves up for success so they have this flywheel effect. Anything else you wanted to add, Kathleen?
Yeah, I love that flywheel. It's like you build up the momentum, prove the value, generate the value, and then keep it going. And I think to what you're sharing, we really want to cover today, how do you get the flywheel going and prove the value of it organizationally to jumpstart the AI journey? Yeah. And, imagine yourself being, I think for companies, large organizations that are starting their AI journey, it can feel like you're standing at the base of a giant mountain and you're trying to figure out, where do I put my foot down first? You could hike in some random direction, and even worse, if everyone starts hiking in different directions, you have, sheer chaos, duplicative efforts. It's very expensive, right? I think we call it shadow AI. Yoni, is that right?
Yeah. Shadow AI is the term. It's kind of a play on the words from shadow IT. Now we're moving over to the AI world.
Yeah. But the value's not tracked well. And I think, in large organizations, if you can't track the value right, you might as well not have even existed, kind of if a tree falls in a forest type of situation.
Yeah. Yoni, I like that you mentioned what we're not going to focus on today, because I do want to ask, it's probably very easy for organizations to jump into those components from the onset. The need and the rush from executives or boards to move fast with AI, you're probably thinking to yourself, you have to build a system, or you have to get all of your data estate in order. How quickly is it or how easy is it to fall into that trap of wanting to do all that first before you really start applying some just, hypothetical thinking to all this?
Yeah, it's very easy. And, that's actually where we're going to go here is the reason why. I mean, it's kind of ironic, right? Before the explosion of ChatGPT onto the scene at the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023, we were working in a world of just doing machine learning models, and machine learning models take a lot of effort to get up and running. You've got to get all the data in the right place, and you've got to be able to train these models based on your company's information. And so there was a lot of work to get going. Now you fast forward to today, and we have these LLMs, and they're pre-trained on the entire internet. So running a very complex AI model like these LLMs is actually, ironically, very easy to do. So it can be extremely tempting to just get started and start building, because you will see some value. You will see these models, respond back to you in human-like terms and answer questions that could be valuable to your organization. And the hard part of actually bringing your organization's data to those LLMs, that is pretty challenging, but to do it right, but to get it just kind of good enough that you can see answers again about your organization isn't that hard.
Mm-hmm.
So while these models are extremely complex, the ability to spin them up is pretty easy, and that actually leads to this POC chaos. And if you look back, I just look back at the time from 2023, 2024, it really was, most of the organizations we talked to just had POCs all over the place. And in fact, worldwide, we were no different. We had shadow AI everywhere. It was hard to kind of track the value, and people, were kind of doing things in their own silos. And you run into a lot of issues here where the use cases that are being built, they really only matter for a very few people in the organization. Or even if it matters for those people, it's still, even it could matter for like a lot of different people, it's siloed. So it never actually expands out to all the other areas. Or the use case just becomes extremely just kind of half-baked because there's no greater authority or the organization pushing you to build it to the end and make it really fantastic. And it kind of just dwindles and dies on a vine. So there's just a lot of things that happen if you kind of go forward and just start building and you kind of take that temptation. And so I think what we want to talk about today is how do you avoid that? And so I wanted to just pass it back to Kathleen here, because I know, Kathleen, we've talked about this before. How do we stop that from happening and get ourselves aligned on the right foot and do it in a way that it's not just overbearing and onerous? We have to slow down and speed up, but we don't want to take the entire year to do something like that. What's your thoughts on that?
Right. And that's where we talked about leaning on our kind of consulting toolkit to really get alignment, to achieve this kind of crucial paradox of slowing down to speed up, not for the sake of bureaucracy, right? But to really build a strong foundation, get alignment, and, bringing it back to our mountain metaphor, like plan your path to the top in a way that's going to help, Brian, organizations get to that, more organizations get to that high level of maturity that you mentioned. And so this is where we want to tee up this like 3-step process. There's lots of consulting frameworks in here. Forgive me, Yoni and I are, consulting geeks, but step 1, you want to exhaustively identify and comprehensively identify potential use cases using what we call a driver tree framework. And we'll go into details here. But once you have, exhaustive set of use cases identified that are tied to organizational value, then you want to organize and prioritize those, leveraging kind of 2 frameworks or approaches that come from the consulting world: a value complexity matrix, and that is fueled by hypothesis-based thinking and using a data-driven approach to kind of validate those, the placement on the value complexity matrix. Again, we'll go into some details here. And then the 3rd step is really to select the best use cases, leveraging what we call the 80-20 rule. So, and that's how you get the flywheel started, right? That those 3 steps help you achieve the flywheel. And in a world where AI is only an API call away, it can be very tempting to skip this step and just get to action. But, we really encourage you to kind of take this 3-step approach to get set up for success, so you don't have the failures, the common pitfalls that Yoni was just chatting through.
Yeah, and I don't want people to think also, Kathleen, while what we're talking about today is that part upstream of the actual build.
Yeah.
It's everything that you need to do before you get there. I think we also want to send the message that while you do it before you actually start building, even after you do start building, you probably want to continue some of these frameworks throughout and continue to iterate, right?
That's right.
Yeah, well, let's dive into the identification here. Who should be at the table? The executives probably have the vision, but there's probably a certain subset of employees that are continually kind of testing out new AI tools or understanding the art of what's possible. So who are you bringing to that table to have that discussion, or at least start to identify and bring in the right people?
That's a great question. You really want to have representation across the various business units. The name of the game here is not creating these siloed use cases. And you really want to start at the use case level. We are not talking about tools, right? AI tools right now, off the shelf things to buy, right? We are talking about business challenges, business opportunities. And so to make sure that we don't fall in the common trap of, what's the solution, looking for a problem, we like to start with this driver tree concept. And again, you're bringing, lots of business units to the table, executives, and getting a really good workshop going is typically how we suggest doing this. But your starting points of this driver tree are going to be, the common drivers that you want to bring to the table when you're first starting are going to be, revenue growth, cost reduction, risk reduction, maybe employee productivity, customer satisfaction. And there's potentially secondary ones related to innovation enablement or, maybe compliance related value or operational speed and agility. But I do think, oftentimes when we're talking about organizations in corporate America, we've got revenue growth and cost reduction or potentially risk reduction as top drivers. And so from there, you want to go and break out, and this is where it's so critical to have lots of business unit representation at the table. Brainstorm, okay, what would be a revenue growth, concept in your business unit, chief marketing officer, and their use case is probably going to be pretty different from a use case that's generated in HR or, in a manufacturing business unit, right? So that's why it's so important to have a lot of representation at this use case generation, because the ideas are going to be very different. But if you start with this driver tree that's rooted in the business outcomes, kind of starting with the top of the summit, the top of the mountain in your mind, so that we're all charting towards the same final destination, that's really key.
Yeah. Is this a situation where you're thinking no idea is a bad idea, or do you want to put some focus on this driver tree?
No idea is a bad idea, but you do want it to fall into the framework, right? You need to be able to tie the ideas to those original business outcomes. And if you see this on paper, it kind of starts with these big buckets and they branch out into, we say MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive buckets. And then it may branch out again and again into their component parts. And it's just an upfront brainstorming session to get all the ideas on the table. We'll talk in the next, step here about how to actually organize and prioritize those. But at this point, there's no bad idea on the table.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would help if I brought it to life with an example here, right?
Yeah, because Yoni led the internal ideation on use cases, right?
Yeah, so at Worldwide, we went through this ourselves back in early 2023. Again, we had shadow AI, everywhere. And we needed to kind of take a step back and get this organized. And the first step is exactly what Kathleen was talking about. We had to bring the right people to the table. So we had the heads of each business unit as key stakeholders here, and they brought their director level people to the table as well. We had people from technology, as well as all the way up to our CEO was very deeply involved in this. And that actually set the stage for us creating this driver tree around revenue growth and profitability, or how do we reduce costs, right? Those were our main buckets. And we wanted to kind of take use cases that that kind of were focused more on one side or the other. And so at Worldwide, our first two use cases that we went after based on the driver tree were Adam, which is Adam AI. It's our internal knowledge management chatbot that kind of knows everything about Worldwide, and the RFP assistant. And it was interesting because Adam, being a general knowledge system and a question and answer chatbot, you can go in 1,000 directions, and each of one of those can have, and they have use case. There's multiple use cases for Adam. But going down the revenue path, what we found, we were looking at things like marketing, things like sales, how we do our services capabilities. Where we landed was we wanted to focus on the sales efficiency and sales effectiveness. And so our first couple use cases with Adam were focused on making salespeople more effective at their job by being able to pull together vignettes or, what have we done in this industry type questions, or can you tell me an example of when we did this type of project in the healthcare industry, focused on increasing patient, through time or something along those lines, right? And so that allows them to prepare for meetings really quick. Then on the flip side, we at Worldwide respond to a lot of RFPs. That's a big part of our job. We have a whole proposal team, and it takes them a long time to get to the first draft of the response to the RFP, to actually understand what the RFP is actually asking, and then to ultimately just respond and get to our final response. And so that to us felt like a cost reduction type of driver, where we could reduce the time and effort it takes for this team to respond to RFPs, and thus, allowing us to save on costs there and time. On the Adam side, with the sales organization, it was fantastic. I think, we were seeing numbers like 25 to 30% gains in how quickly they can come up with a sales pitch process, a sales pitch, a way for them to be more effective in how they're talking to their clients on a day-to-day basis. And we have a lot of metrics around that. On the RFP side, it was pretty interesting. Like I said, we went in thinking it was going to be a cost-cutting activity, but actually the fact that we can now respond to RFPs in a more efficient manner, we realized there were so many RFPs that we just said, you know what, we don't have time. We can't get to this one. We don't have enough people right now. And now we can actually respond to RFPs way quicker, way easier. There's some that, could be a moonshot for us, but we're still going to respond with our best effort. And it could only take us a day or two rather than 2 weeks. And that's led to some top line growth for us as well. Like, we're responding and winning more RFPs than we ever have. Our time to first draft of an RFP is 80% faster. That just translates into cost savings, but also revenue growth. So that was a nice surprise for us from a driver tree perspective.
And you're teeing up perfectly step 2 of our consulting toolkit here. So I'll jump into that, and then we can tie in those examples, Yoni. But step 2 of our toolkit here to get started, to build the flywheel momentum, in an aligned, smart way, is to organize and prioritize your use cases, right? So step 1, you've generated a laundry list of them, great, from different business units. But now, which ones do you want to get started with? You need to organize and prioritize. So we leverage this framework called the value complexity matrix. And that sounds complicated, but it's not. Just imagine, a simple graph where your y-axis, the one going up and down, is your value, and your x-axis going across is complexity. Okay. And you take your use cases, and of course it's hard to precisely quantify the value and complexity of each use case, when you've just created this laundry list. But you make some assumptions leveraging hypothesis-based thinking. Okay, there we go. More consulting terms. Hypothesis-based thinking to place each of your use cases on your 2x2 here. And you say, okay, Yoni, your RFP assistant, like, we think we can cut down on first draft generation by 80%, right? What does that quantify? How do you quantify that into the value, i.e. cost savings, right? Because the value is, in this case, if we're focused on revenue and cost, I mean, value is a dollar driven, number. So you make assumptions, you develop a little back of the envelope model, and you have value. On the other axis is complexity. So do we have the data readily available to ingest, to train, to fine tune the models? Do we have the computational power we need? Yoni, what are the other pieces?
Yeah, those are the big complexity ones from a technical perspective, but there's also regulatory complexity, compliance complexity. There's sometimes even within organizations, political complexity. Some use case may seem amazing from a value perspective, but there's maybe 3 groups that are fighting for the ability to do that use case, and it's just not worth it to do it right now. It's just going to cause too much stir. So there's a lot of different things you have to consider when you're thinking about complexity.
Yeah. And then so you come up with your first, hypothesis-based placement of your use cases on this value complexity curve, right? And it's not perfect, and that, but it's a starting point to help you select your best use cases. Now, a critical part of hypothesis-based thinking, and I say this as a recovering scientist, is, you develop a hypothesis, but then you really need to validate it with data. And so as you launch out to either, make your final selections, maybe you want to go gather some additional data from the proposal team to gather information on how long it takes to do XYZ. Like maybe you want to actually go and gather data to refine your hypothesis on the use case placement on the value versus complexity matrix.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll just add to this is that it just like it was tempting to just get started on building AI. It's very tempting, especially as I'm a recovering scientist as well. Yeah. And it's hard for some people to make a guess, make a hypothesis in the absence of information. And so a knee-jerk reaction may be, I need to just go gather information first before I make a hypothesis on what the value is or what the complexity is. But that could lead to analysis paralysis. And it also makes it very difficult for people to kind of react. And so generating the hypothesis first in the absence or in the lack, with having lack of information is a good thing. Mm-hmm. You could be completely wrong, but now you have it up on a page, you show it to the subject matter expert, the person who's in charge of running this use case. And now they know exactly kind of what they need to talk to and how they need to refine it. So it's important to be able to just kind of put your foot out there and just make a hypothesis to get started. And then you can get to the data to refine it. It will also direct you to the right data that you need to refine it in the right direction.
This episode is supported by Vast Data. Vast delivers a unified data platform purpose-built for AI and advanced analytics, eliminating silos, accelerating insights, and scaling to meet the demands of modern enterprise workloads.
Well, Yoni, bring us back to the internal example here. You talked about the 2 use cases that we did move forward with Atom AI and RFP Assistant, which are going phenomenally for us. But I'm interested on that 2x2 chart. How did it compare to other use cases? Because we weren't just dealing with those 2. As I understand it, we had dozens upon dozens of use cases, if not more, that we were also considering. So how did we make those weighted decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly how Kathleen laid it out. We had 82 use cases. After all was said and done, they were 82.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, 82. And, we spent a good 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so in war rooms with different lines of business, different subject matter experts, technology, trying to make sure that we're all aligned on what this value is. We were putting hypotheses out there. We were refining it with data. We were shifting things. I think at one point, the RFP Assistant was probably ranked number 64 on the list. But after we continued to refine it, we kind of realized a bunch of things about some of the use cases that were above it, about the RP Assistant itself. Atom was always top on the list. It was kind of the thing that you needed to do to get started. And we knew it was going to branch off and be able to be used for a number of different use cases in its own right. But RFP Assistant started pretty low and kind of bubbled up after all of this refining. So that's how we went about it. We are just, to fast forward to today, we still have this value complexity matrix. It's evolved immensely over time. We're constantly taking use cases, removing some that we don't think are good anymore. Some we thought we need to build custom, but now they have off-the-shelf products for that. So, no reason to reinvent the wheel. So there's a lot of things that happen with this, but getting started off with that on the right foot, it is now a place for everyone to react to, for everyone to, align against. And it just kind of like it's our place we go to when we're trying to think about what are we doing next and where are we going to invest our money.
Yeah. It's a great backlog now, right?
Yeah.
And this starts to tease towards, if Yoni and I are invited back, a part 2 podcast around how do you sustain the momentum and keep the flywheel going. But how do you continue cranking through that backlog of use cases is one.
Yeah.
What's a whole other conversation.
I will definitely, or we will definitely invite you back for a part 2 here. But I'm curious, how do you balance the need to go for some more moonshot projects that might be harder to accomplish versus the low-hanging fruit that might build momentum towards going for those moonshot projects? So, are you looking for just the quick, easy wins, or are you looking for, something that you can sink your teeth into?
As you just teed up step 3 of our process perfectly here. So thank you for that. We recommend taking the quote unquote 80-20 approach for actually selecting your use cases. And this is not about blindly selecting everything that's in that, bright green quadrant. If you break up your matrix into, 4 squares, essentially, then your high value, low complexity is going to be your low hanging fruit, obviously, right? And you clearly want to get started with some of those. That's going to be where you're driving value with not as much effort. But maybe your high value, high complexity will include some of your, moonshot, as you say, use cases. And you probably want to go for some of those too. And so this is where you go from, a math algorithm to, using a conversation, leveraging the 80-20 approach, and just strategically picking the right use cases to go after once you've organized them in a way that you can, a leadership team can wrap their head around and make a decision around what to move forward with and how to get started.
Yeah. And I'll just use yet another consulting phrase here. It depends, right? I think it depends on the appetite of your company and the culture of your company. There are some companies that are very risk averse, and there are some that are, risk tolerant. And so depending on the leadership, how much momentum you actually need to build to create that flywheel. There are some organizations that just need a little bit of momentum and they can get going. And so you can sustain kind of taking on a really complex use case because the leaders and the board and whoever has some patience. And there are others where it's like, no, you need to keep on just getting those quick wins and proving yourself. But this, again, having this 80-20 kind of mindset where you're spending 80% of your time on 20% of the use cases and only focusing on those that matter to your organization. And now you have this with some categorizations of low-hanging fruit or moonshots, however you want to call them on the 4 quadrants. It gives you direction and it gives you an ability to make meaningful presentations, and everyone knows what you're talking about because you've kind of, again, bringing back to the original analogy of the mountain, we've circled everyone back to the same spot on the mountain and we're all marching up together.
Yeah. And importantly, you're marching up because you've rooted all of your use cases in one of our common, driver tree starting points of revenue generation or cost savings or, productivity. So, and I do think that as we have launched our, they're not POCs anymore, they're production, capabilities with the RFP Assistant and Adam and more, as Yoni was discussing, we take a lot of effort to track the value and continue reporting on the value created from these capabilities, because that's, important to demonstrating that AI is transforming how we're working and continue, earning the right to pursue additional use cases.
Yeah. And you can't, the old adage, you can't change what you don't measure. And so sometimes the use cases feel good. They feel like they're going right, but then you kind of measure things and it's okay. Or sometimes things feel rocky and they're not really moving along. But when you kind of take a step back and look at how things have changed, you're actually making a a pretty meaningful, impactful difference. I think the other thing to mention about use case driven approach is that we often find with all of our clients that use cases beget use cases. There's sometimes you didn't even think of these use cases when you were getting started, but because you did one use case that was related, you kind of uncovered something else that you would never have thought of before. And that's happened, I would say 99% of the times on client engagements. It's happening within Worldwide as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the two of you state this out. It feels and seems rather simplistic, and it is pretty straightforward. But I'm curious, as we head out into the real world where things are never as easy as they seem, where are we finding stumbling blocks with the clients? Is it with bringing the right people to the table? Is it aligning, because that feels like several landmines in and of itself, aligning everybody behind one or two use cases? Or is it just openness to revisiting things? Yoni, your example of our RFP assistant, where we thought it was going to save money, it ended up saving money, but also driving growth. So where do we see stumbling blocks, and better put, what should listeners be avoiding, or what should they try to avoid here so that they can make it as simple as you stated?
Yeah, I think I'll just speak freely here about some things. I think, everything we talked about today, just getting started on the right foot, taking a little time to slow down, to speed up, that's a big stumbling block. That's why we're talking here today. And so having a structured approach to defining and prioritizing, and then ultimately selecting your use cases like we're recommending here, is a big one. And that's one that we've seen over and over and over again. But I do think just some other things that come to mind are getting the right leadership to the table. There's AI is a big buzzword. It's a lot of hype right now, and it's easy to say you're an AI first company or something along those lines. But if you are a leader and you're not actually driving those meetings or asking the tough questions, then I think you're doing a disservice to your organization. I mean, we still to this day have weekly meetings all the way up to our CEO, where he is driving us hard on our internal use cases and how it's translating into value. And I'm not saying every company needs to have their CEO driving that. It would be great, but leadership does need to actually take action and be engaged. That's a big stumbling block that we're seeing as well.
Yeah. And I also think that, if you look at a traditional kind of starting point engagement that we take with clients, Brian, like we start with the workshop to bring the stakeholders to the table to do the use case generation ideation from the driver tree, right? We do the prioritization matrix. Like not everybody is comfortable taking that hypothesis-based approach and doing a value versus complexity scoring. That can be challenging, right? And so as consultants, we can oftentimes help, overcome that and get a placement, get alignment on the right use cases, and then actually get the POC started. Like that's a typical way, starting point that we partner with clients, because just that whole process can be a little bit overwhelming when you've got the, shadow AI that's shotgunning in the background. So oftentimes this will come from like a top-down approach to get alignment, which I think is a really smart thing to do before the shadow AI takes off.
Well, Yoni, I loved earlier that you said use cases tend to beget more use cases. What else can the value complexity matrix tell us? Can it tell a company where to invest for talent to help support some of these things? Can it help identify business models? What can we learn other than just understanding what to go after first?
Well, I think you hit on the talent thing for sure, because what you're going after, that's going to necessitate the right people, right? And so I think it's going to allow you to kind of set your hiring pipeline in the right direction, where you're going to invest in your people. I think if you get the right technology people in the room with those use cases and understand what will it take from a technical perspective to get it going, and the data that the chief data officer and his or her organization, what data needs to go in place. I mean, we're actually working with a client right now where we are doing this use case identification prioritization, but we've been in there for some time helping with their data platform and their data governance capabilities. And the data platform is we're migrating them from an on-premise platform into a cloud-based platform. What data we migrate first, which data domain we are doing data governance on first and second, that also can now be use case driven, right? Because we have this use case identification matrix. It's got all these different use cases on there. That's going to now guide how we govern our data and where we start that process first, because it's a big process to get everyone aligned on how we're going to do our data governance program. It's a large effort to figure out how you're going to prioritize your waves of migration of data into the cloud. But now you've got this guiding light of use cases driven by going all the way back to the beginning, the value, the driver tree, and then you have the value and the complexity of each of them. So now you can have direction on how you migrate data, direction on how you govern data, direction on how you hire, and then ultimately what you put into production and get value out of.
Yeah.
Anything I missed there, Kathleen?
Well, I no, that's right. And I was also just thinking a little bit about Brian's question, and I want to actually take it back to the first step, which is the driver tree ideation, right? And it's a practical tool, not only because it links your use cases to business value, but it forces you to think about things in a really comprehensive way. And so I do feel like we often get unlocks in those discussions where business unit leaders may not be thinking about, a use case until we force the framework on them and they say, okay, gosh, well, maybe I'm thinking about a mining client that we've been working with, right? Like the revenue growth side is harder in mining because the price of the materials is very much controlled by the market, right? But costs, okay, let's break out what are the 5 major cost components of our organization, right? And then, okay, let's follow the line on that. Okay, if maintenance of our equipment is one of our biggest cost drivers, what could we be doing to decrease the cost of maintenance of our equipment? And when you ask the questions like that, it leads to ideas that you maybe wouldn't pull out of a hat if you ask somebody, hey, what ideas do you have for Gen AI for your business unit, right? Like it forces the ideation in a way that covers the entire comprehensive bucket linked to the top value drivers. So I think that driver tree approach really helps lends itself to creative ideas that can help really transform businesses in a way that just asking for use case ideas may not.
And there's one more thing I'll add to this that I just thought of while you're talking, Kathleen, is while all of this is in service of prioritizing, selecting use cases, I think that the hidden like value and gem that you get out of doing this, it's a very human process. Mm-hmm. And you're bringing people together to kind of ideate on things that they probably wouldn't do in their day-to-day. And just going through the motions of prioritizing things, going through the motions of thinking about what truly you're trying to get at from a value perspective, that brings people together and often unlocks ideas that they would have never even thought of, or even gets them excited and feeling ownership around getting these use cases off the ground. Whereas if you're just kind of told to go make this an AI use case and make it happen, it doesn't have that ownership feeling. It doesn't really have people kind of like feeling
rallying around it.
Yeah, rallying around it. So there's this intangible thing that happens when you actually do this work that, again, it's very human. So, that's my pitch to also not turn this into, consultants GPT and make it automated. Like you definitely need people rallying people.
Yeah.
You just gave me chills, Yoni.
I know. Sorry.
Fantastic. Well, we're running short on time. So, thank you to the two of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and your busy days, analyzing, identifying, and plotting those use cases, not only for us here at WWT, but on behalf of all of our clients. So thanks again for joining this episode, and we'll definitely invite you back for a part 2.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, as we wrap up, a few clear takeaways emerge from today's conversation that apply whether you're just beginning your AI journey or looking to scale with more structure. First, AI success starts well before any model is deployed. The most effective organizations invest in upstream alignment, identifying use cases tied directly to business value and not just experimentation. Second, prioritization is critical. A structured framework like the value complexity matrix helps leaders make trade-offs based on ROI and feasibility, not just enthusiasm and executive pressure. And third, broad engagement matters. Cross-functional input ensures you're not just solving in silos and that your initiatives have both traction and longevity. The bottom line is, AI becomes most effective when it's treated as a business initiative and not just a technical one. And what sets high-performing organizations apart isn't just their tools, it's their process. If you like this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast, please consider sharing with friends and giving us a rating. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or watch us on WWT.com. This episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast was co-produced by Naz Baker, Kara Kuhn, Mallory Shafran, and Stephanie Hammond. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch, and my name is Brian Felt. We'll see you next time.